What would happen if an 1,000-foot tsunami hit the East Coast? Okay, that's what a question that one person asked on Quora, and here's what they read. So let me actually play with this idea. How does it happen? Well, let's say there's an event on the mid-Atlantic ridge. One side of the ridge pops for about 2,000 miles from Iceland to the equator. The edge of the American plate rises 10,000 meters in the span of a minute. How would that even be possible? Okay. First thing that happens is hundreds of thousands of devices measuring earthquakes goes off. This is going to produce a lot of shaking. Now, by the time it reaches land, it's not going to be much. But out at sea, this is a big deal. That pop displaces a lot of water, and unlike an earthquake happening at one point, this displacement is over hundreds of miles. There's some warning, however, enough to evacuate the president and most of his cabinet, gosh, sigh, as well as critical members of Congress, sigh. Not sure about the USSC, but I assume there's an effort to get them to safety as well. They'd likely be relocated to the West Coast. So it's not just the East Coast that's getting hit by this. It's also the coast of Europe, the Gulf of Mexico, Northwest Africa, and Northern South America. This is a big event. The further away you are from the epicenter, the more the energy will disperse and reflect. There will probably be a warning for people to seek high ground, but with only 2 hours, the result will likely be gridlock on freeways. Oh damn. Topographically, most of the East Coast is flat, so you'd have to go a long way if you can get out at all. Now we're getting to the scary part. I remember reading all this. We'll focus on the US, though it might be really cool to be able to walk from England to France. See as the wave approaches, it needs more water to propagate itself. So it starts to pile up. This causes the water...
To suck, right?
Huh?
It sucks water towards it.
Yeah. It needs more power. This causes the water ahead of the wave to recede, exposing the sea floor. You'd have an interesting hour as the wave pulls up most of the water off the continental shelf. Enjoy it. Dark humor, isn't it? Now forget the one big wave. That's not a tsunami. Think of a high tide that doesn't stop rising. That's what happens. That pile of water, with all the momentum of trillions of pounds of force, pushes itself onto land and keeps pushing itself and pushing and pushing. That's terrifying. Not sure if you noticed, but water is heavy. It's roughly 8 pounds per gallon, and it doesn't concentrate its force. It pushes equally. Now, most buildings are not made to withstand sideways force. People are more worried about their homes falling down, not being pushed along. So the lateral force is much weaker than vertical force. Translation: walls get pushed in. The building goes off from vertical. Building falls down. If parts float, there's a chance it'll float away. But all the force of that water will break it up. If you're imagining you'll swim or be in a boat, I have bad news for you. A tsunami is like a garbage disposal. It's not just water. Everything even partially buoyant, and a lot of things that aren't, will be in there with you. Most hulls are not designed to actually have pieces shoved into them, so small boats will break and capsize. Might be okay on a ship until it flips over too. So that sound you heard was about 150 million Americans dying right away. But you'll be safe once you get to the Appalachian Mountains, right? Wrong. Where there are few mountains higher than 1,000 meters, most of the mountain chain is lower than the wave. Even those mountains are at risk, because with sufficient force, water will flow uphill, and worse, the topography of the mountains will cause the force of the water to tear the mountains and everything covering them away.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Just tear the mountains up.
Uh-huh. If you're living in Chicago, thinking your life is just dandy, that noise that you're hearing is the sound of the Atlantic Ocean saying hello.
It's coming up the Great Lakes, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. The wave will pour down the Ohio Valley, up the St. Lawrence Seaway, and across everything south of South Carolina. Oh, and Texas, you are screwed, along with the Gulf states, Mexico, and most of the Caribbean. Jamaica might get lucky. See, Florida will not stop the wave, but it will cause the wave to bend. Instead of the force getting spent on the East Coast, it wraps around to repeat the process on the north. Now the waves probably spent half of the day just flowing over everything in this great brown slurry. Oh gosh, that's so messed up. Slowly the wave would go right over Mississippi and wash up parts of Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. However, the show isn't over yet. All that water, well, it's washed out of the ocean. Now it wants to go back. So that great oozing flood would wash back. Half back along the East Coast, half down the Mississippi and Great Lakes seaways. And in that ooze are trees, mountainsides, buildings, toxic chemicals, dead animals, and other debris. In addition, these rivers can't flow through that ooze, so instead they add to it. That's right, the rivers above the tsunami impact site start to flood further upstream. Eventually, the water will recede, but the ground left behind will be virtually sterile. That's because of the salt water contaminating water systems that never evolved to handle it. Potentially, the USA would lose 2/3 of its arable land.
Wow.
There's also petroleum and plastics mixed in with that mess, along with fertilizer and sewage. Immediately, disease would be the largest threat to survivors, followed by starvation. Survivors would largely be relocated to the west. But hey, you can go and get money from the debris and stuff, right? Wrong. The muck left behind would be tens to hundreds of meters thick. It's not just mud. It's trees, cars, building material, and the corpses of millions of people and tens of millions of animals. The methane alone would make bubbling fields of rotten mud that would stretch for miles. Oh gosh. America becomes everything west of the Rockies, including the Dakotas. Optimistically, the USA and Canada would form a joint government to deal with resettlement and survival. California just became the breadbasket of the nation. Mexico might come along too. Most of the other Latin and Caribbean countries would be wiped out. China's economy would reel, but likely become the economic driver of a world that would probably wind up losing 1 billion or so people. The economic centers of half of America and most of Western Europe would be gone. Isn't that scary? That sounds horrible. I don't know why, but I feel the urge to make a Sims 2 horror movie about that.
Yeah. Can you do that?
I probably could, but it wouldn't look as good as it does in the movie, so it would look really cheesy. I mean, water animations, that's one thing I don't really know. That'd be really difficult. But I could probably figure out something like that, like what's left behind, to make it dramatic.